topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Hello, and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations in diversity. My name is Bahia Yaksan. I'm a core alignment coach, which means I train and coach people and organizations who are interested in developing patterns of behavior that serve their clients themselves better and replacing old patterns that are not helpful. And that usually results, actually, I will say always results in everyone feeling relieved and happier. I have an amazing guest today. I'm really grateful that we have Davis Chief of Police, Todd Henry. And today, the title of this episode is called Protecting the Community Amid Uncertainty. It's very relevant. I'm so grateful. I just want to mention a couple other things before we bring them on, which is this week is an amazing convergence due to the lunar calendar. Just all the things happening, that today's Ash Wednesday in the Christian calendar, beginning the Lent season. It's also the first day of Ramadan and the Muslim calendar. It's also Chinese New Year's started the 17th, Losar, the Tibetan New Year this week, New Year in I think Vietnam and Korea, and it just feels pretty powerful to that all these different celebrations and religions that touch so many people all over the world are just happening right now, and it gives me some hope that people focus on the good and treating each other well just helps increase the good. Which reminds me of one other thing. I want to acknowledge the sad passing of Reverend Jesse Jackson, who just left us yesterday. And he was an amazing civil rights worker and quite famous for one of his speeches, several speeches, but the Keep Hope Alive. This is very helpful to be reminded of how important that is, and challenging times, and which in my mind we're facing, which leads me to bringing out our Chief of Police, Todd Henry. And I'm gonna just thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
I just want to let folks know, I think you've been in the police field force for about, is it 28, 29 years?
29 years. September will be 30 years. Of course, I started when I was 10, so you can do the math.
Okay. Good job. So I also wanted to tell folks, I just want to read a little bit of what I asked you to if you would be willing to talk about today, because I saw you at a Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Martin Luther King celebration, which Davis has always a beautiful celebration. And as I was leaving to join many people to do an annual peaceful protest, I saw 3 police officers standing there, and I said, "Oh, that's so great! I know they're here to help." And then I recognized our chief and said, "Gosh, it was so on my mind and many people's minds, the awful situation in Minnesota and other cities where federal agencies are being sent into cities, and just to me it's not like a two-sided thing. It's like there's so much footage from so many different angles showing violence being inflicted and amendments being violated, people being hurt. We know 2 people shot in the face, but I've heard over think it was 39 people killed this last year due to violent actions of federal agents who are overstepping, not directed well, maybe not trained properly, but it's just, I'm speaking about it very calmly, but it's very tragic and very upsetting. And so I asked Chief Henry, gosh, I'm not alone in wondering what would happen if agents were sent to our city or your city, any city, but now I'm talking to the Davis Chief of Police, and I just asked him, can we just start a conversation about how will it affect the police department? Will the police's enforcement role be respected? I know some of these things are unpredictable, but I don't know where you want to start answering.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. And I mean, honestly, we've had a lot of these conversations in the community because there's just so much concern. And it's, as you know, it's not a local issue. It's not a state issue. It's a national issue and even an international issue. And I think, the level of uncertainty and fear and anxiety that is kind of wrapped around this is in its own way just tragic to watch, right? We've had meetings with different community members where they may be undocumented, and their concern is really like, what do we do if ICE comes? And some of the things that are expressed are just heartbreaking when you hear a mother saying, what do I do if I'm arrested and my child's at school? And the thought that we have to have these conversations is just horrible. And obviously, as a police department, our goal is to keep people safe. That's what we do. That's what we're here to do, is to try and keep our community safe. So it can be very frustrating that sometimes we too feel helpless, right? Where can we fill in? What is our role? How do we support our community? And we're very lucky in the state of California. We have SB 54, which was passed, the Values Act, which clearly states, obviously, immigration enforcement is not local law enforcement's job. We don't deal with that. Our job is public safety. And the law through SB 54 clearly defines that, which is, I think, a great thing because it just sets the bar as to where it needs to be. And we're constantly trying to figure out, how do we support our community in this space? Because I think one of our biggest fears is community members tying us in with ICE, and we lose trust. And that's something that we work on a daily basis to build and maintain, because we could have 1,000 cops, but without trust, we're ineffective. And a community needs to know that, hey, if we contact Davis PD because we are a victim of a crime, that we're going to be there to support them, and that we have no role in immigration. We have no role in sharing immigration status, and we shouldn't even be asking about immigration status because it's irrelevant to us, right? It's how do we provide the service to the people that need it, regardless of documentation status. And, we've had these conversations, and we've been really struggling to figure out, how do we fill this space, and what does that look like for us? And that can be a lot of things, talking about, hey, this is the process that you may encounter. Here are your rights, which are guaranteed to you. Talking about building a safety plan, which, if somebody would have told me we would be having those conversations a year ago, I don't know if I would have totally bought into it, but that's the space that we're in. And it's just very difficult because, not only are these incidents occurring throughout the nation, but just the fear of them themselves can be so impactful to so many different people. When you hear stories of people not going to school, not going to work, fearful of going to the store, that's tough. Because most times in normal situations, right, if somebody doesn't feel safe, there's a lot of things that we can do to improve that situation. This is one where we don't have as many options available to us. And so we got to find those opportunities where we can reassure people and provide some level of guidance. But it's a super complex issue, and it seems to just continuously evolve. Just when we thought maybe we've, hit an equilibrium, then things change, and now we're also trying to address how do we make people feel safe, not just as the police department, but as the city and the community as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, okay, that's a lot of really good information. One thing I want to go back to is how you clarified, which I really want everybody to understand and know is true, that the city police department, your job is public safety. It is not immigration enforcement. And it's so sad that because of the experiences and thank God people videotaped it. Otherwise, we might not have seen it with our own eyes. Just there's so much mass confusion about uniforms, as you said. Just to underscore another point you made, uniform, just someone in a uniform now can be terrifying in a way that it wasn't before for most people. We know it has been terrifying for some marginalized groups. But as I heard Jane Fonda say the other day, it's really striking everyone now that, and especially if the uniforms are mixed, like and misused and mislabeled, like not proper IDs, masked federal agents, whether it's Border Patrol or ICE agents, and with no warrants. I mean, there's so many, how many amendments are being violated, first, fourth, fifth, and then so much confusion, like, well, is there a uniform that I can trust out here? And the encroachment on public safety, and then some propaganda saying things like, well, police aren't cooperating with us. Like, well, actually they are doing their job if they're not cooperating with you, because their job is not immigration enforcement.
Yeah, and I mean, there's clear law around that, right? We have no obligation to assist, and that's not the area we need to be in. And I think that needs to be very clear, because, as we mentioned, right at the end of the day, we are focused on public safety, and that is a fear that we all have, is that we get potentially coupled in, or somebody is in need of help from law enforcement, and they're fearful of reaching out because of that association. And that's something I struggle with all the time, because the thought that somebody has been victimized by a crime, and then they're victimized a second time because they feel fear or apprehension to reach out to get the services that they should get. It's just heartbreaking. It's tough to watch, and it is occurring, right, all the time. And we try to the best of our ability to alleviate that concern, but it's a rational, reasonable fear, and I get that. And so, I mean, that's really work that we have to continue to do, is to continue to focus on that trust building, continue to focus on building those relationships, and just being a part of this community.
Yeah, again, to just underscore what you're saying, that because I remember one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, like, if someone is in a house and their door is being not just knocked on but broken into, and they're afraid because of how they look, or because their skin is brown or black, or because they have an accent that's not considered American, even though there's so many Americans with all kinds of different accents, and residents, that, like, would I call 911? Like, what is, or is 911 going to turn me in? But I think you just answered that question, right? Like do call 911. That's not going to be the same people illegally breaking in or smashing your car window with a glass breaker, or pulling you out of a car even when you're yelling, I'm handicapped, I'm handicapped.
Yeah. And I think, I get the reasonable fear of that. And, again, all we can do is continue to work on that. But yeah, you call 911, you're getting your police department. They're part of this community. They care about this community. And, it can be very complex, these scenes, especially when, somebody's at your door and you're not sure who they are, because it doesn't take much and there's been cases of this where people are dressing up like an ICE agent and they're not. And, they could have nefarious intent. And I think that's a reasonable fear. And so it just creates all this confusion and anxiety. And, we always tell people, hey, if there's something going on and it doesn't feel safe, then call us. Obviously there's, boundaries as to what we can and can't do when somebody's enforcing federal law. But at the very least, we're there as a witness. And, sometimes the presence of local law enforcement can be a de-escalation factor, right? Because they know that somebody's there and somebody's monitoring and recording and observing these incidents. Because, we have real concerns about people getting hurt during these events, which we have seen over and over again on the news. Mm-hmm. And we don't want that to occur in our community.
Another thing you mentioned was that you don't ask questions. It reminded me about whether someone's documented or undocumented. If they need help, you are there to help them be safe. Your job is public safety. I used to work along with the police in the state police, town and county police when I lived in Maine, and we were working to create safety nets for victims fleeing from violence. And we worked with courts and we worked with doctors, helping them understand why it takes so long for victims to leave, and trying to shift away from victim blaming. And they did an amazing job. Maine was one of the first states to pass great domestic violence laws. But that's where I learned we could assure victims of domestic violence who were not documented that we could go to the courts. They were due process. The system would protect them. They didn't have to be fear being undocumented, which was just really an incredible safety net. And it's really nice to hear California Police Department reinforcing that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think everybody in the state recognizes that and the importance of that. And, to go back, one of my biggest concerns is, this sense of fear, because for us to be effective, we need to have information. And, I always worry that there potentially is somebody out there victimizing people specifically because they have this belief, and it may be a founded belief, that they're not going to report it to the police. And that's bad. And so, if people believe that, hey, our local law enforcement is going to participate with ICE, they're going to support them, they're going to share information, then we're never going to be able to accomplish our job. And, that's something that, through SB 54, which I think is great because it's clear law that we have to comply with. It sets that, bar for everybody in the state. And, you're starting to see more and more states take this on, and even ordinances, which we had a discussion about not too long ago in city council about even, potentially expanding at the local level some of those restrictions. I think the biggest concern that, we can also have around this topic is, there's foundational concern around it is, if ICE does come into town, what do we do, right? How do we respond? What does that look like? And what can local law enforcement do? And, like I said, we can obviously always be present. We can be a witness, but that's also tough too, to be able to tell a community member. That's why we have to have these safety plans. That's why we have to have these networks, because if that does occur, there's not a lot that we can do.
Can you give some examples of what you mean when you say safety plans. Do you mean like individual families each family at home has to have a safety plan, like with their children, their spouses? Are you also talking about like community-wide level, like the city and the police and the, I don't know, other departments coordinate a safety plan? But can you just give us some examples?
Sure, and I think that goes kind of across the board to all those different entities. We really focus kind of on at the family level is, walking through and even documenting some of this information of, if I am detained by ICE, am I the sole breadwinner? Am I, responsible for taking care of the kids? And if I'm detained, what does that look like for my kids? Who is going to pick them up? Have I had conversation with the school district around that? Have I had conversation around, friends, family, neighbors, to be able to communicate what that looks like and who do they reach out to, right?
Mm.
And what are the steps that they need to take? Because, I think something that everybody should be aware of is we have to have some type of plan in place, because that's not the conversation or the decisions that you want to be making in the moment. You need to kind of be in space where you can think that through, make sure that people understand what that plan looks like and where they fall into that plan. And, it's sad that we have to have that conversation or provide that guidance, but I think it's critically important. And, it's much like, what do we do if the house catches on fire, right? We don't want to be thinking through that process while the house is on fire. We should have at least a plan in place to, okay, we're going to get out any door we can. We're all going to meet up in the front yard so that we can get accountability of everybody. And so when, an incident occurs, we default to what we've talked about or trained or discussed. And, it has a little more coherence to it. And so I think, that's one of the things that we definitely recommend. The other thing is, knowing your rights, right? What can ICE agents do? What can you ask for? What are your rights, which everybody in the country is entitled to? And awareness is a big piece of it. And obviously, there's a lot of nonprofit organizations in our area that do amazing work in that space. And, working also to connect people to legal services or the support that they need. And much like any problem, a significant problem in a community, it really takes all of us to be on the same page and to be working together in unison to be able to get good results. And that means everybody. And when we do that, we're always going to be the most effective in a good outcome, or at least a better outcome.
Thank you. That really helps to hear those concrete details for anyone who hasn't thought of that yet or gotten to that yet, because I'm sure it's a terrifying conversation to raise with your children or
Absolutely.
or anyone dear to you. Is like, yeah, talking all those, like, who's going to pick up who from school? Do we have a neighbor? Do we have a friend who can deliver us groceries during this period? And just make sure everybody understands it and rehearses it.
And, it's interesting too, because this conversation, and it is like, there's no question about it, that is a difficult conversation to have. But it's kind of similar in some ways to active shooter training, whether that's at a workplace or a school. Like, nobody wants to think about that. Nobody wants to go through that. But in some ways, I also feel it can be a little empowering, because in this situation, it can be very easy to feel helpless. Like, what do I do? I feel like this thing is pending and it's coming, and what can I do about it? And being able to direct some of that energy into finding a response model, finding a potential solution, working through those issues, even though they're difficult. Talking to a lot of people, they find that to be empowering. Like, I'm taking active steps to keep myself, my family, my community safe. And I think that's a good thing, right? Because it can feel overwhelming. And sometimes people can feel very helpless, and that's not good space to be in, especially for a very long time. And so we do have to find these little areas of our lives where we have control and we have influence, and we can really engage in this process, even though it's difficult. I think there's this unintended consequence of it makes us feel a little more empowered.
I'm really glad you mentioned that. Yeah, and often this is a cliche, but taking action is like an antidote to depression, fear, powerlessness. So I appreciate you mentioning that. And while you also mentioned, I can put these numbers in the show notes so that when this is uploaded as a podcast, anywhere you get your podcast, I can put the name of like California Immigration Project, which has amazing legal defense, incredible volunteers who can meet people at courts the same day of, especially since people are being taken, even though they're following the legal procedures and following the laws, they're being illegally taken. So California Immigration Project, NorCal Resist, I think helps with a lot of material goods, even including like helping finding furniture and I haven't called Migrant Watch, but I know that's a good network that can help let people know if ICE comes or is around. As a, I know it's been so cast as like a wrong thing to do in some news agencies. I'm someone who like tries to hear different perspectives, and so I see there's a lot of stuff that I think is are lies, not true, and I can say that unequivocally. But Migrant Watch is something that is very helpful to human beings, helps increase public safety, and is a good thing to do. And I don't have those numbers, but if someone has those numbers, I'll put them in with the show notes, but also if you have a friend who has access to internet, if you don't have it at the moment, it's a good thing to have around to help witness, to be a part of volunteering for neighbors or calling, California Immigration Project yourself if need be. So those are just three resources. Do you have any off the top of your?
I think those are three big resources in our area, which are huge. And I think, I try and find the beauty in everything where I can. I think that's so important. And the one thing that has always been impressive to me is, when a crisis presents itself, how many people really step up. And whether that's as an individual or part of an organization, but really passionate, caring people that just fill some of that void. And I always look at that as like, man, that's amazing, right? Because when people are in need, there are so many people that are willing to step up and try and support. And I find that to be kind of a bright spot in its own way.
That's so true. And that reminds me of something else you said about just we could also use our influence to have conversations with people who are not direct targets, but are believing misinformation. Like I'm just going to give an example that someone I know and care about. There's so many people I know who are want to argue with me about things, and it's just really helpful for me to just stay calm and just say, does that even make sense? Like, do you think, like someone said to me the day, those protesters are being paid, like how could that possibly be true? How could people be standing out in 0-degree temperature and not just in Minnesota but other difficult situations? Does that really make sense? Like really trust your guts, like go back to your own values and ask yourself, is what I'm hearing, could that be true? And if we can do that more and more with like rather just than not saying anything, because it doesn't help. If we can just like share information. Don't have to convince anybody. Just say, you want to reconsider that, and do you hear about what's happening in the detention agencies, like the Dilley Detention Agency in Texas? Just absolutely horrific, cruel practices are happening that more and more of us need to rise up and be aware so we can take right action. Because it'll grow unless we counter it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and that can be very dangerous on a lot of fronts. And even kind of in that vein, but sort of different, it's interesting because I will get calls from the community saying, "Hey, I think ICE is in town." And that will spread very quickly through different networks, and but it's not right. And that part is, I think, really kind of represents the state of mind so many people are in, right? Where you're anticipating this event or ICE being around every corner, and that part is really hard to hear. Because it's just the fear of it, and there's a reason for that fear, no question about it. But it's not only that you may be exposed to that, or you may have these encounters, but just the fear of them occurring in its own way is so detrimental to our community. Which, when you have just large portions of your population who are fearful to do simple things like go to work, go to the grocery store, that is really hard to hear, because it's so counter to what we want to see in our community, right? We want people to feel free, to feel valued, to feel safe. And so when you're seeing that being jeopardized, it's hard to watch.
Well, I really appreciate how much you're underscoring how much the fear factor is in itself impacting our behavior and our decisions and limiting us severely in ways that may not need to limit us. But again, you validate. Go ahead.
No, yeah, and I really try and put myself in that mindset, because I'm a white male. I can walk wherever I want, and I don't have to think about it. And when you hear those stories from people, it's really hard, right? Like, you have to really put yourself in their situation, that, life presents all of its own challenges on a daily basis in normal situations. And then you layer this on top of that. And I just think, man, it's not like, well, this is going to go away in a day, right? Or 2 days. And that's a long time to be sitting under a layer of fear and stress.
Yeah. And like you said, it's so real. Like one of a recent guest a couple of weeks ago was in touch with farm workers and how their lives have changed so much in horrific ways, and people are separated even before, even without a metro surge or whatever they call it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it's impacted the entire country. There's no question about it. And I think when you're seeing these images on television, or you are having communications with friends who've experienced this, it can be a lot to absorb. I mean, it can be a lot to absorb for everybody, but especially those who are at risk.
Yeah. I really feel for the kids who have less power than anyone.
Yeah.
Well, I yeah, feel free to add anything else along the conversation. I know that we also wanted to let local folks know that the annual, I'm transitioning to a different topic, but we can always come back to this one because it's just so good to hear your perspective. I really appreciate everything you're reinforcing and articulating really clearly. But one of Davis' annual event we have is Picnic Day, and I know last year we had a shooting, which was really alarming, and we're kind of, very privileged, I think, in Davis relative to a lot of, and particularly, as you said, if we're white. But I know that the city and the police and others have been thinking about making more plans to increase public safety when there's such a huge event. I think, is it 70,000 people? 70,000 people showed up last year. This town used to not even be 70,000 people.
Yeah, it doubles the population. And really, we've been in the planning phase since the day after Picnic Day last year. And, one of the big efforts that we put in, a lot of people come into town from outside the area. Obviously, there's a lot of events, and when they're in the city, a lot of them are alcohol fueled. And, we have just an extraordinary high call load for all public safety, whether that's the fire department, medical, or police. And it can be complex, right? And we bring in every single Davis PD police officer, and we have always, reached out to Woodland and West Sac to bring in additional personnel. This year, we're expanding it even more to have additional personnel in town because, our goal is, well, twofold. One, we've been in really good communication with UC Davis about communication and setting, clear expectations of, hey, what does a safe event look like and how are you part of that? But also trying to make sure that everybody knows, hey, the rules, the laws do not stop on Picnic Day. We still have to abide by those, right? And we want people to have a good time, to enjoy the event. I mean, it's such a historical event for Davis, but we want them to be safe, and we have concerns around that. So this year will look different. We will have a much larger presence, and our goal is to, be a little more proactive, because what we've really seen over the last few years is kind of pop-up events in public spaces, whether it's parks or schools. And I think there's probably good intentions initially, but these things can grow really rapidly. And especially with the integration of social media. And so, when you get that many people into a very defined space, it can result in issues. And so we really want to just kind of prevent that from occurring to the best of our ability. Because this is really primarily, obviously it's a piece of Davis, but it's primarily a UC Davis event, right? To showcase UC Davis. And, we just want that to be consistent with the city too. And we just want people to be safe because, since last year, I've repeatedly heard from, Davis residents and community members who have expressed a sense of fear around it, right? And, it can be impactful in so many different ways, and the parties, the traffic, the incidents that result from those. And so this year we really wanted to focus on communication and education, which I think is the best approach and always probably the most effective approach, because people want to comply. Sometimes I think they get caught up in the moment. Then we start to forget, hey, what are we supposed to be doing? So we really just put a lot of effort into that space. But yeah, day of, it is going to, hopefully look different as we take a different approach and make sure that we have sufficient resources in town. So.
Thanks for doing that. I met with Jenny Tan with the city the other day, and she's been interviewed several times about how it's going to be more resourced and more communication alignment.
Alignment. It's a good word for it.
Yeah. Well, I know that another topic that would be interesting for people to hear about is there has been some, I don't know the details at all, but apparently the e-bikes have been causing some situations, or yeah, I don't know. Tell us about that, and tell us what the city and the police department have been able to figure out about that?
Yeah, this is it's definitely an emerging issue, and not just in Davis. This kind of is, obviously I talked to police chiefs throughout the state, and I would say this topic comes up inevitably in every conversation. And last year I think there was more e-bikes sold than cars in the U.S.
Wow.
And yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. And there, I always preface this with, I have no issue with e-bikes. I think there's absolute benefits to them, micromobility, to be able to improve somebody's, transportation options. That's a good thing. I think the biggest concern kind of comes around. This is, in a lot of ways, some of these, depending on the type you get, right? Which is, a type 1 is a pedal assisted. So the motor's helping you pedal. And then you have a type 2, which is a throttle controlled one, and then you have a type 3, which is both. And it's legislation and laws, they're slower. And so when you have a new technology that kind of starts to flood the market, it takes a while for laws to kind of figure out what is the problem and how do we address that. And that's really the space that we're in. It is very convoluted right now to determine who can ride what type. What are the rules? What are the potential speeds of these? But there's a lot of information coming out. There's a ton of white papers, especially from emergency rooms, hospitals, medical associations, who are seeing this increase in pretty significant injuries to young riders coming into hospitals. Because a lot of these devices, there's not a lot of regulation on the front end. It's a requirement to manufacturers. And so you get this, type 2 throttle controlled e-bike, which is supposed to stop at 20 miles an hour, right? It can't exceed that. But you do a Google search on how do I override that system, and it's not very complex. And we have some of these other ones that, like Scions, which are basically, almost a motorcycle that's electric. And I think the concern is, would we give a motorcycle to a 12-year-old with no training and say, good luck, go out and ride? And do we need to start kind of looking at it as a whole, going, okay, what devices do we want to ensure that younger kids aren't using? Because it's similar to a bike, but the speed of it and the agility of it changes the dynamics. And when you interact with cars who aren't thinking or being prepared for a bike that's moving at that speed, and you have a rider who doesn't know, hey, I still have to follow all the rules of the road as I would otherwise, it's a recipe for bad things. And so, a lot of what we've been doing is trying to do education around it, and not just to kids, but parents too. Like when we look at the 2-wheel stand-up scooters, you need to be 15 with a permit or older to operate that. But there's really no guidance to a parent when they're buying it, right? And so we're really trying to kind of focus in that space right now of education and training. And then obviously, kind of working at the state level with different associations to find legislative fixes just to make, it safer across the board, ensuring that if we're giving a device to somebody who's younger, that we're not putting them in an unsafe environment, most of the time unintentionally. Like, I get it. I have kids. You have to drive them around. And if there's a better way to do it, I understand why people would want to buy the bike. But our concern is really just a safety concern.
And we don't learn the rules of the road until we get a permit and a license. So that sounds pretty risky to have a electric fast going bike when you don't actually know all the rules of the road. Yeah, it doesn't sound like a great setup.
No. And, I think, the system will adjust, and, laws do catch up. But yeah, when you have an electric bike that can reach 70 miles an hour, when I was 12, I'm sure I would have loved to have had that, but there's no way I should have had that. And so, I mean, that's, that's our biggest concern. And, we get these collisions where another bicyclist on a traditional bike or just a pedestrian is hit. And when you're hit at those speeds, the impact and the injuries are going to be substantially more significant. And so I think it's, sometimes I hear people say, well, it's just a bike. And I'm like, sorta, but it definitely has capabilities a bike just doesn't have it. I mean, just to get to 20 miles an hour on a bike takes some effort. And, with an electric bike, that changes the dynamic. So, I think it's always a combination of education. And then I really think, it is a legislative fix, because, yeah, we can do enforcement, but, I'm not a huge proponent of us filling that space. I don't think that, one, we don't have the staffing, and two, I don't think that's the right approach. It's like, hey, how do we make sure people know what this device can do, what devices they can ride? And then I think, from my perspective, I think manufacturers, there needs to be more of a burden on them to provide that information at point of purchase, right? Hey, this is the type of bike you're purchasing. Here's the safety requirements, making sure that people are aware so they're not purchasing something unknowing of the potential side effects of that, and then giving it to their kid with the best intentions, and something traumatic happens.
Yeah. Well, I'm noticing we have only 4 or 5 minutes left, so I wanted to yeah, thanks for letting us tap your knowledge in several different areas. Um, I would just really appreciate it if you can kind of reiterate again, uh, kind of like a kind of reassurance, but also like clear, reinforcement and direction that the role of the Department of, the Davis Police is to public safety, and for people to any kind of reassurance, and maybe even repeating some of the things you said that can help us understand what to do if we see ICE agents, how we can help neighbors, how we can help ourselves if we're a potential target.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you for bringing that back up, because I think it is important, and I don't think we can communicate it enough. And, again, the big things are, there's state law that sets very clear parameters for what law enforcement can and cannot do, which I think is great. We have policy that mirrors that. We do a lot of education internally, and it's just not our role. We don't have a role in immigration. We don't enforce federal law. And, I think the important thing to remember is we are here for public safety. We are here to be a resource to this community. We're never going to ask about documentation status. We're never going to share information with ICE that, hey, we've contacted this person and we don't think they're documented. Like, that's just not going to happen. That's not the space that we need to be in, because what we're focused on is, constantly working to continue to build and maintain that level of trust. Because if we want to be able to provide good public safety, ultimately people need to trust us. Otherwise, we become completely inefficient. It's the most important thing that we have. And when that is damaged or frayed, or people just don't have it, we become ineffective and our community becomes less safe. And so that's really our focal point, is that we understand the fear. So how do we try and be supportive in that space? How do we try and identify ways that we can make people maybe feel less fearful, but also continue to focus on that development of trust, because we need them and they need us. And to be able to do that, right, they need to know, if I pick up the phone and I call 911, I'm going to be safe, and the police are going to show up, and they're going to do what I need them to do, and they're going to be there to support me. And if we lose that, then we're at a complete loss.
Wow, thank you. Very clearly said. really deeply appreciated. And I'll just add, it helps that you wear badges and identification. Honestly, like even at the peaceful protest, which I knew was going to be peaceful, and I know we have good community relations with the police department here. It was literally reassuring to see, like, oh, badges, name tags, and no masks. That's one way to know. That's one way to recognize police officers that you can trust and distinguish them from federal agents. So thank you so much. While the time is up, this is really helpful information. I want to share it with as many people as possible. And I also want to thank our engineer Rebel and our listeners and viewers and our producer Dean Piper. And once again, Chief Todd Henry, thank you so much for what you're doing for the community and all the officers that you're training so well and collaborating with in West Sac and Woodland and other places. And everyone remember to tune in next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Talk4TV or W4CY.com. And may we all continue to have these important, enriching conversations around diversity and safety. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you.